At Thanksgiving. My mother leaned across the table, her eyes sharp as broken glass, and hissed, "You don't deserve a seat at this table." Everyone froze. The silence was thick, heavy like wet snow. It pressed down on the room, on the turkey, on the perfectly set china that suddenly seemed so meaningless. My fork, halfway to my mouth with a bite of sweet potato casserole, clattered against my plate. The sound was tiny, but in that moment, it felt like thunder. My older sister, Olivia, who usually had something to say about everything, just stared at Mom, then at me, her mouth slightly agape. Sarah, usually so quick with a comforting word or a deflective joke, just looked down at her plate, stirring her gravy. Michael, my brother, the family prince, swallowed hard, his eyes wide. No one spoke. No one moved. The air was charged, crackling with unspoken tension. Before we dive in, if this story is already touching a nerve, please take a moment to subscribe and share this video. It truly helps the channel grow, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum trying to break free. It wasn't a surprise. Not really. Not the words themselves. Anyway, I'd heard versions of them my whole life, whispered in the margins, implied in every dismissal, every oversight. But hearing them so nakedly, so publicly at a table that was supposed to represent warmth and belonging, that was different. It felt like a punch to the gut, a cold, sharp stab. Yet beneath the familiar sting, something else flickered. A tiny spark of something new, something hard. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't even try to defend myself. All the energy for that had drained out of me years ago. Instead, I simply stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor, a sound that seemed to shatter the thick silence. It made everyone jump. All eyes were on me now. Not just Mom's venomous gaze, but Olivia's confusion, Sarah's shame, Michael's unease. They watched me, waiting for me to crumple, to explain, to apologize, to somehow make it all better for them. I reached into the pocket of my designer dress, the one I had picked out specifically to make a good impression, the one they probably hadn't even noticed. My fingers closed around my phone. It felt cool and solid in my palm. I pulled it out, clicked it on, and the bright screen illuminated my face in the dim dining room light. My thumb moved deliberately, unlocking it, navigating to the banking app. I heard a faint gasp from someone. Maybe Sarah. My eyes met Mom's across the table. Her expression was still defiant, but a flicker of uncertainty now played around the edges. She didn't know what I was doing. No one did. What I did next stunned them all. I pressed a button. A single decisive tap. My fingers moved with a practiced ease. A calm born not of indifference, but of absolute resolve. The screen glowed, confirming my action. Then I put the phone back in my pocket. The silence returned. But this time it was different. It was waiting. Expectant. They looked at me, then at each other, trying to decipher the unreadable expression on my face. The spark wasn't just flickering anymore. It was burning. And it was just the beginning. I was Emily Hayes, the youngest of 4. And from the moment I could remember, I was the afterthought. It wasn't a mean-spirited neglect. Not usually. It was more like an oversight. A gentle forgetting. A consistent overlooking that etched itself deep into my bones. My childhood was a series of small uksind, almost imperceptible erasures. When family photos were taken, I was often tucked at the very edge, sometimes partially out of the frame. When stories were retold, my small triumphs or hurts were rarely included. My voice, even when I raised it, often seemed to get lost in the louder, more confident echoes of my siblings. There was Olivia, the oldest. She was the golden child, the firstborn, setting the standard for everything that came after. She was smart, poised, and naturally charismatic. When she spoke, people listened. When she achieved, the whole family celebrated as if it were a collective victory. She married young, had 2 beautiful kids early on, and settled into a comfortable life in the suburbs. A pillar of stability. Her house was always pristine. Her children always well-behaved. Her husband always presentable. Everything about Olivia was right. She embodied the family's ideal of success. A good marriage, healthy children, a respectable, well-managed home. Mom and Dad constantly lauded her responsible choices, her dedication to family. Even a simple phone call from Olivia was met with a chorus of excited whispers. "Olivia's on the line," they'd say, as if royalty were gracing our humble abode. Her stability was the benchmark, the gold standard against which all other lives, especially mine, were quietly, subtly measured, and found wanting. Then came Sarah, the middle sister, a force of nature in her own right. Sarah chose a path of service. She became a nurse, working long, demanding shifts in the emergency room. Her dedication to helping others was constantly praised. "Sarah saves lives," Mom would say, her chest swelling with pride. "She's truly selfless." And Sarah was. She was good at her job, compassionate and tireless. Her sacrifices were seen as noble, her exhaustion as a badge of honor. When she talked about a difficult case or a long shift, everyone leaned in, offering sympathy and admiration. Her work gave her an unquestionable moral authority within the family. While Olivia represented the ideal family life, Sarah represented the ideal moral compass, always putting others first. She was the empathetic one, the caregiver. And her identity was woven tightly into that role. No one could ever accuse Sarah of being selfish. She was too busy taking care of everyone else. And finally, there was Michael, the only son. He was without question the family prince. From the moment he was born, he was treated differently. His scraped knees received more attention. His report cards were analyzed with more care. His every decision, from which college to attend to what career path to pursue, was discussed at length, often with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for national crisis. His potential was limitless, his future bright, and his happiness seemed to be a collective family project. When he decided to go into finance, everyone nodded approvingly. "A man needs to provide," Dad would say, winking at Michael. His achievements, no matter how small, were amplified. His struggles, no matter how minor, were met with profound concern. If Michael wanted something, it was usually provided. If Michael needed help, he got it. He was the center, the axis around which the family often revolved. And everyone, including me, implicitly understood his elevated status. And then there was me. Emily. Just Emily. The youngest. The one who always tagged along. The one whose drawings were pinned up briefly before making way for Michael's trophies or Olivia's certificates. My achievements, when they finally started to come, felt different. I wasn't saving lives like Sarah. I wasn't building a perfect family like Olivia. I wasn't upholding the family name in a traditional male role like Michael. I moved to Chicago, a big city, and carved out a career in marketing. I worked hard, climbed the corporate ladder, and eventually became a director at a Fortune 500 company. My salary was impressive. My projects impactful. I was good at what I did. I loved the challenge, the creativity, the sense of building something from nothing. But when I tried to share these successes with my family, they landed with a dull thud. They were dismissed. Not with anger, but with a polite, almost bewildered indifference. "Marketing? Oh, that's nice, dear," would say, her tone suggesting it was a quaint hobby rather than a demanding career. "Are you happy? Though, Emily, money isn't everything," Olivia would add, subtly implying that my pursuit of a career was a poor substitute for a husband and children. Sarah would just nod, her expression always a little sad, as if pitying my choices, my apparent lack of the true fulfillment she had found in her selfless work. They saw my ambition as selfish. My move to Chicago was framed as abandonment. My dedication to my work was seen as a sign that I was avoiding what truly matters. When I told them about a major promotion, it was often met with a quick, "That's good. Did you hear about Olivia's son's soccer game? He scored 2 goals," or "Michael just got a new car." My world, my efforts, my successes were always overshadowed, always deemed less significant, less worthy of attention or pride. It wasn't just that they didn't understand my work. They didn't seem to value my path at all. They had their definitions of a good life. And I, a forgotten daughter, simply didn't fit into any of them. I was trying to build my own table, but they kept telling me I didn't deserve a seat at theirs. The invisibility wasn't just a feeling. It was a carefully constructed reality, built brick by brick. Dismissal by dismissal. And slowly, painfully, I began to believe it myself. The calls started to dwindle. At first, it was subtle. I'd call home, eager to share some news. A project launched. A new client won. A small victory in the competitive world of Chicago marketing. The conversations would be polite but brief. That's nice. Honey, everything good? Then the quick pivot. Olivia's kids are doing great in school. Or Sarah worked another triple shift. Such a saint. Michael had just bought a new condo or gotten a promotion or was thinking about taking up golf. My life. My stories. My very existence felt like an inconvenience. A brief interlude before they could get back to discussing the lives that truly mattered to them. I started calling less often. Why bother? It felt like shouting into a void. Like trying to catch water with a sieve. Each unanswered call, each quickly redirected conversation chipped away at my hope. It felt like I was constantly auditioning for a role I was never going to get. A seat at a table that simply wasn't meant for me. The effort felt monumental. The returns negligible. Eventually, the calls stopped altogether. Not with a dramatic argument. Not with a final fiery declaration. Just a quiet fading like a photograph left too long in the sun. I cut ties, choosing distance over invisibility. It wasn't a conscious, angry decision at first. It was a slow, painful withdrawal. If they weren't going to see me, if my voice didn't matter, then why was I expending so much energy trying to be heard? It hurt profoundly to let go. But it also offered a strange kind of peace. The constant sting of rejection. The subtle invalidation of my worth. It lessened when I removed myself from the source. Chicago became my refuge. My sanctuary. I built a life there. A really good life full of friends who did see me. Colleagues who did value my contributions. And a city that felt vast and full of opportunity. My career soared. I worked tirelessly. Poured all my energy into it. The void left by my family was partially filled by professional success. I became a Fortune 500 marketing director. My salary entered the six-figure realm, then steadily climbed. I led massive campaigns, managed large teams, and saw my ideas come to life in major national markets. I bought a beautiful condo with views of Lake Michigan, a place I had worked years to afford. I drove a nice car, wore expensive clothes, and traveled to exotic places for both work and pleasure. On paper, my life was enviable. It was the kind of success many people only dreamed of. But that success, for all its glitter, often felt hollow. It was a beautiful, meticulously crafted shell. But sometimes when I was alone in my spacious, Quiet condo. The emptiness would seep in. Loneliness gnawed at me. A persistent dull ache. I had achieved everything I set out to and more. But without family recognition, without that fundamental sense of belonging, it felt incomplete. Who was I doing this for? Who was truly proud? My friends were. Of course. But it wasn't the same. There's a particular kind of warmth. A unique validation that only comes from the people who knew you as a child, who saw you grow, who share your history. That was the warmth I craved. The validation that remained stubbornly out of reach. I'd catch glimpses of my family's lives on social media. Olivia's perfect family vacations. Sarah's humanitarian efforts abroad. Michael's promotions. My heart would ache. Not necessarily with jealousy, but with a deep, quiet sadness. They were all still connected, still celebrating each other, still moving through life as a unit. And I was outside looking in, a ghost at their feast. I wondered sometimes if they ever thought of me. Really thought of me beyond a passing, vague sentiment. Did they ever wonder if I was happy? If I was well? Did they ever regret the silence? I doubted it. Their lives seemed full, bustling, rich with the connections I lacked. My drive for success wasn't just about ambition. It was a desperate, unspoken plea. I thought perhaps subconsciously that if I achieved enough, if I became indisputably successful, wealthy, and accomplished, they would finally see me. That my achievements would be so undeniable, so impressive that they couldn't possibly dismiss them. I was trying to buy their respect, to earn a place at their table, not with emotional connection, but with material proof. It was a desperate gamble born of deep-seated hurt. A silent hope that somehow the sheer weight of my accomplishments would force them to acknowledge me. To finally say, "Yes, Emily, you belong." I convinced myself that if I just worked harder, climbed higher, earned more, the love and recognition I craved would eventually follow. The years of silence were a crucible, forging me into someone professionally strong, but emotionally brittle, always waiting for the call, for the invitation, for the moment they would finally see the daughter they had forgotten. Then the call came. 2 years had passed since the last strained, superficial conversation. 3 since I'd physically been in their presence. My phone buzzed on my desk one afternoon, displaying Mom on the screen. My heart lurched. A mixture of dread and a desperate, foolish hope. I stared at it for a long moment, my finger hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to let it ring to maintain the protective distance I'd built. But the other part, the deep wounded part that still craved connection, urged me to answer. Maybe. Just maybe. Things had changed. Maybe they missed me. Maybe they finally saw me. "Hello," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Emily, is that really you?" Mom's voice was surprisingly soft, almost tentative. This alone was a shock. Mom was rarely tentative. "It's Mom," Listen, we're having Thanksgiving this year. A big family gathering. And well, we'd really like you to come. It's been too long. A big family gathering. Just hearing the words brought a familiar knot to my stomach. A mix of anxiety and a flicker of longing. My mind raced. Was this a genuine olive branch or just a courtesy invitation? They expected me to decline. I tried to read between the lines to discern the true motive behind the unexpected call. But the hope? That stubborn, persistent little ember glowed brighter than any cynicism. Thanksgiving, I repeated. Buying myself time. That's surprising. Well, you know, family, she said, her voice regaining a hint of its usual briskness. It's important to be together. Everyone will be here. Everyone. That was the unspoken promise. A full table. A united front. And I, Emily, was being invited back into the fold. It felt like a test. An opportunity. This was my chance. I thought. To finally show them, to prove that I wasn't just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was successful. Independent. Accomplished. Maybe. Just maybe. My success might finally buy me their respect. Their acknowledgement. A real seat at their table. Okay, I said, surprising myself with the quickness of my decision. I'll come. As soon as I hung up, a wave of nervous excitement mixed with old anxieties washed over me. This wasn't just a visit. It was a performance. A strategic re-entry. I wasn't just going home. I was returning. And I intended to return in style. I wanted to leave no doubt about the life I had built for myself. The Emily I had become. First, the travel. No cheap flights or long bus rides for me. I booked a first-class ticket. The extra legroom. The attentive service. The quiet privacy. It wasn't just about comfort. It was about the statement. It was about arriving rested, unruffled, and in control. This wasn't the young, insecure Emily traveling home with a duffel bag. This was a successful professional. Next. Transportation. On the ground. I reserved a sleek BMW rental. Not for flash, I told myself, but for reliability. For comfort. But deep down, I knew it was also about pulling up to my childhood home in a car that spoke of success. It was a physical manifestation of my independence. My ability to afford things they might not expect. I wanted them to see it. To register it. Then the outfit. I spent an entire Saturday afternoon shopping. A rare indulgence for me. I wanted something elegant. Understated. But undeniably expensive. Not flashy. But refined. I settled on a dark emerald green silk dress that draped perfectly. Paired with simple, classic heels and a subtle gold necklace. It wasn't about showing off. It was about presenting a polished, confident image. It was about looking like the woman I had become, not the girl they remembered. Every detail was meticulously chosen to project success, stability, and self-worth. And the gifts. This was perhaps the most emotionally loaded part. I didn't want to just bring a bottle of wine. I wanted thoughtful gifts. Gifts that showed I remembered them. That I cared despite the years of silence. For Mom, a beautiful cashmere scarf in her favorite shade of blue. For Dad, a limited edition coffee table book on American history, a topic he loved. For Olivia, a gourmet food basket with artisanal cheeses and wines, something she would appreciate for her hosting. For Sarah, a gift certificate to a high-end spa, a much-needed indulgence for her tireless work. And for Michael, a sleek, expensive watch, something he had mentioned wanting years ago. Each gift was carefully selected, purchased from upscale boutiques, wrapped beautifully. They weren't just presents. They were offerings, gestures of goodwill, an attempt to bridge the chasm with tangible proofs of my affection and prosperity. As I packed my meticulously chosen wardrobe and placed the wrapped gifts carefully in a separate bag, a familiar tension coiled in my stomach. Hope mingled with a deep, persistent anxiety. I told myself this was it. This was my chance. My success. My outward presentation. My thoughtful gestures. Surely this time it would be enough. Surely they would finally see the real me. The Emily who had made something of herself. I believed with a desperate, childish faith that my achievements displayed so clearly might finally earn me the respect, the love, the place at the table I had always longed for. The return home wasn't just a trip. It was an investment. A gamble with my most fragile hope. I truly believed success could buy respect. And I was all in. The drive from the airport to the house was a strange mix of nostalgia and apprehension. The familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood. The old oak trees. The houses I'd known all my life. They looked the same. Yet everything felt different. Filtered through the lens of time and distance. I pulled the rental BMW into the driveway. The engine purring softly. A stark contrast to the old rust-pitted minivan we'd had when I was growing up. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic flutter in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. I walked up the familiar front steps the key Mom had, sent me feeling heavy in my hand. The door opened before I could even use it. And there was Sarah. A surprised but genuine smile on her face. Emily. You made it. She gave me a quick, almost awkward hug. Then Olivia appeared, offering a more reserved but polite greeting. Michael just gave me a nod and a small, almost shy smile from behind them. Mom was there, too, standing a little behind the others, a tight smile on her face. It wasn't the warm embrace I'd secretly hoped for, but it wasn't a cold shoulder either. It was neutral, which for my family was almost a victory. Dinner was announced a few hours later, after a flurry of polite but superficial conversation. Everyone gravitated towards the dining room, the heart of all family gatherings. I watched them go, A small, I'm hopeful smile on my face. This was it. The big family Thanksgiving dinner. I imagined a perfectly set table. A place for everyone. Finally. A place for me. But as I stepped into the dining room, my smile faltered. My stomach dropped. There it was. The large, polished mahogany table laden with a glistening turkey, steaming side dishes, and an array of festive decorations. 8 people were milling around, finding their spots. Olivia and her husband, Sarah, Michael, and his new girlfriend, Mom and Dad. They all settled into their chairs, pulling them out with practiced ease, chatting and laughing. But something was wrong. There were 8 people, and only 7 chairs were set around the table. My eyes scanned the room, desperately searching for the missing chair. For my chair. There wasn't one. My heart began to pound. A slow, heavy rhythm of disbelief and dawning. Recognition. They hadn't just forgotten a chair. They had forgotten me again. It was a physical manifestation of the invisible exclusion I had felt my entire life. Sarah. Seeing the confusion on my face, I finally looked up from adjusting a napkin. She gestured vaguely towards the kitchen. "Oh, Emily," she said, her tone utterly casual, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "Just grab the kitchen stool." The words hit me like a physical blow. The kitchen stool. My gaze instinctively darted towards the corner of the kitchen, visible from where I stood. And there it was. The same tiny 3-legged wooden stool from my childhood. The one I used to perch on when I was too small to reach the counter. The one I sat on, relegated to the periphery when there weren't enough chairs for guests. The same exact stool that had been my seat at countless family gatherings. A literal emblem of my lesser status. It was chipped, worn, and far too small for a 32-year-old woman. It wasn't just a stool. It was a symbol. It was a statement. It was a clear, undeniable message. You are not important enough for a proper seat. You are an extra, an afterthought, a temporary addition. My meticulously chosen designer outfit suddenly felt ridiculous. My expensive rental car, my first-class ticket, my thoughtful gifts, they all seemed to mock me from the phantom chair that wasn't there. They hadn't seen the success, the strength, the woman I had become. They saw only the forgotten child, easily relegated to the smallest, most uncomfortable perch. I walked into the kitchen, my movement stiff, robotic. My throat felt tight, a lump forming that made it hard to swallow. I reached for the stool. Its rough wood, familiar beneath my fingers. It was light, easy to carry, just as it had always been. I brought it back into the dining room, the eyes of my family on me. Though no one said anything. No one offered to swap. No one even looked truly apologetic. They just watched as I awkwardly squeezed it into the small space between Michael and Olivia's husband. Barely fitting. I perched myself on the tiny stool, literally lower than everyone else. My knees were practically at my chest, my head barely clearing the table. I had to crane my neck to see faces across the table. I was physically beneath them, my body conforming to their expectation of my place. Invisible once again. More than invisible. Diminished. Small. Unimportant. The hope I had carried for weeks, the belief that this time might be different, shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces on the polished floor. The stool wasn't just a lack of a chair. It was a carefully chosen insult. A deliberate act of putting me back in my perceived place. And as I sat there trying to make myself comfortable on that ridiculously small seat, I felt the familiar bitter sting of being an outsider. An observer. An uninvited guest at my own family's table. The meal hadn't even truly begun, and I was already suffocating under the weight of their casual indifference. The dinner began. A cacophony of polite chatter that grated on my ears. I tried to participate, to blend in, to ignore the burning humiliation of my physical position. I picked at the food on my plate. The perfectly roasted turkey suddenly tasting like ash. My posture on the stool was awkward, uncomfortable, and it made every attempt to relax feel impossible. I felt like a child at the adults' table, a feeling I hadn't genuinely experienced since I was 10 years old. I listened to Olivia recount her son's latest academic achievements. A glowing report of A's and extracurriculars. Sarah shared anecdotes from her grueling shifts at the hospital, her voice laced with the weariness of a true hero. Michael, ever the prince, talked about his recent promotion and a new investment opportunity, his words punctuated by nods of approval from Dad. Everyone had their moment, their stories, their spotlight. I watched them, a quiet observer, my own accomplishments feeling increasingly insignificant, childish, and worst of all, irrelevant in this setting. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. The silence, my own silence, felt like a betrayal to myself. I had come all this way, put in all this effort, and I wasn't going to disappear without a trace. I took a deep breath, trying to summon the confidence that usually came so easily in a boardroom, but felt so elusive here. You know, I began, my voice a little louder than I intended, cutting across Michael's explanation of market trends. Everyone paused, turning to look at me, some with curiosity, others with a hint of annoyance. I actually had a pretty big year at work, too. My team and I. We launched this campaign. It was huge, nationwide, and it ended up creating almost 200 new jobs. I tried to inject enthusiasm into my voice to convey the genuine pride I felt in my work. It was a real challenge, but we pulled it off. It felt really good. You know, to build something that had such an impact. I paused, waiting for some flicker of interest, some acknowledgement. My eyes went to Mom, then Olivia, then Sarah, then Michael. Mom was the first to speak. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin, her gaze cool, dismissive. "Oh, Emily," she said, her tone oozing with a subtle condescension. "That's nice, dear. But really, money isn't everything, is it? We're talking about family here, about what truly matters." The emphasis on family and truly matters hung in the air. A clear judgment on my choices, on my life, on me. Her words were a familiar refrain, a well-worn path to invalidation. She effectively reduced my significant professional achievement, one that had created jobs and economic value, to a mere pursuit of wealth. Something she clearly deemed less noble than the paths my siblings had chosen. "Olivia, ever the loyal," Echo chimed in, her voice edged with a sneer. "Some people forget what matters. Career, money. It all seems so empty if you don't have a real purpose. Doesn't it? Like, you know, raising a family or helping people." Her eyes flicked pointedly to Sarah, then to her own children, as if drawing a clear contrast between their meaningful lives and my apparently shallow existence. It was a direct hit, a dismissal of my entire life's direction, not just my recent achievement. She implied that my career was a selfish endeavor, devoid of true meaning, especially when compared to the noble pursuits of her or Sarah. Sarah just offered a sympathetic, almost pitying glance, a soft sigh. "It must be hard, Emily, being so far away from everyone, focusing on all that corporate stuff." Her words weren't overtly harsh, but the underlying sentiment was clear. I was missing out. I was on the wrong path, and I was to be pitied for it. Her pity felt worse than outright anger. Michael, bless him, actually tried to say something. A small, "That's pretty cool, Ems." But Mom shot him a look, and he quickly retreated, burying his face in his plate. Even his small attempt at validation was squashed. Then came the gifts. I had spent hours selecting them, chosen them with care, hoping they would convey my affection and my success. I had presented them earlier before dinner, trying to make it a light, warm moment. But now, after the "money isn't everything" speech, they were brought up again, almost as ammunition. "That scarf, Emily," Mom said, holding up the beautiful cashmere I'd bought her. "It's lovely. But really, you shouldn't have spent so much. It's a bit much. Don't you think? For an old woman like me?" Her words implied extravagance, a lack of practical sense, a subtle critique of my spending habits. Olivia chimed in. "Yes. The cheese basket was very fancy. But you know, the local grocery store has perfectly good cheese. We're not that highbrow, Emily." A slight smirk played on her lips. They were mocking my thoughtfulness, twisting my efforts to show affection into further proof of my perceived detachment and misguided priorities. My attempt to bridge the gap with carefully chosen tokens of love and respect was thrown back in my face. twisted into a criticism. My accomplishments were ignored. My thoughtfulness was mocked. And I was still perched on that ridiculous stool. Physically lower. Metaphorically lower than everyone else. The little wooden stool creaked under my weight. Groaning in protest. Mirroring the internal groaning of my own spirit. Every slight. Every dismissal. Every casual put-down accumulated. A slow, agonizing boil. The years of silence. The initial hope for change. The humiliating stool. The constant invalidation. It all crashed down on me in that moment. The casual cruelty. The effortless way they minimized my existence. It was overwhelming. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes. A fierce, hot sting that threatened to break through. But I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. The boil was reaching its peak. And the pressure was about to explode. But not in the way they expected. The air in the dining room felt heavy. Choked with the casual cruelty and unacknowledged barbs. My chest tightened. A familiar pressure building behind my eyes. I felt small. Insignificant. Just as they intended. But something was different this time. The usual sting of humiliation was there. Yes. But beneath it, a slow, steady burn was igniting. The stool creaked again. A faint protest beneath me. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I didn't even stand up immediately. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate breath. My gaze swept across the table, lingering on each of their faces. Mom, with her tight, disapproving mouth. Olivia, smug and self-satisfied. Sarah, with her pitying, almost condescending expression. Michael looking away, avoiding my gaze. They all looked so comfortable, so assured in their positions, their narratives, their collective judgment of me. You know, I began. My voice soft, almost a whisper. Yet it cut through the den of polite family chatter like a razor. It drew everyone's attention, pulling them out of their comfortable little worlds. My tone was calm, steady, so utterly unlike the emotional outbursts they might have expected. This calm, I knew, was far more unsettling. Mom frowned, a slight irritation crossing her face as if I were interrupting something important. Yes, Emily. She prompted, her voice impatient. I met her eyes directly, holding her gaze. There was no wavering. You all talk a lot about what matters. About family. About helping people. About responsibility. And money isn't everything. Apparently. Unless, of course, it's my money. A ripple of confusion went around the table. Eyebrows furrowed. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. Sarah looked genuinely puzzled. Michael finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. A flicker of concern there. What are you talking about? Emily? Mom asked, her voice sharper now, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the edge of the table, though my head was still lower than everyone else's. It was a strange juxtaposition. My physically inferior position against the growing power in my voice. I'm talking about how I've been paying Mom's bills for the past 2 years. The words dropped into the room like a bombshell. The room exploded. Not with shouts. Not immediately. But with a sudden shocked silence, followed by gasps, whispers, and incredulous stares. It was like a dam had burst, and a flood of unspoken truths was rushing out. "What?" Olivia blurted out, her perfectly coiffed hair seeming to stiffen. "What are you talking about?" Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Michael pushed his plate away, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Dad, who had been quietly eating, looked up, his face pale. And Mom's face was a mask of furious, mortified denial. I continued, my voice unwavering, relentless. Every month, for 2 years. Your rent. Mom. Your utilities. The internet. The groceries that magically appear in your pantry every week. Each item was a quiet, damning accusation. Each word landed with the weight of truth. Even Michael's car insurance when he totaled his old one and couldn't afford the new premiums. Who do you think covered that family emergency payment for him? Michael flinched, his face turning crimson. His girlfriend looked at him, then at me, her expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. Olivia looked furious, her eyes darting. Between me and Mom, trying to piece together the pieces of a puzzle she clearly hadn't known existed. Sarah, the selfless nurse, looked utterly devastated, as if her entire worldview had just been upended. You've been living in this house, eating the food, enjoying the heat, driving your car, I continued, my voice gaining a quiet intensity. All of it. Subsidized by the selfish daughter who only cares about money and corporate stuff. Then came the final twist. The one that brought a deeper, more profound betrayal. And I know about the house. Mom, I said, looking directly at her, watching the color drain from her face. I know you secretly sold it 2 years ago. The house you told everyone was family property. The one you said you'd live in forever. You sold it and then you rented it back, pretending nothing had changed while I was unknowingly paying your rent to a new landlord. The silence that followed was different from the earlier awkward quiet. This was a heavy, suffocating silence, pregnant with shock, betrayal, and unadulterated shame. Everyone was staring at Mom now, their faces etched with disbelief. The air was thick with it, tasting metallic and bitter. The festive atmosphere of Thanksgiving had been obliterated, replaced by the raw, ugly truth. My words had not just revealed a secret. They had shattered illusions, exposed hypocrisy, and ripped open the carefully constructed facade of our perfect family. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt devastatingly, undeniably seen. The silence after my bombshell felt like a physical entity pressing down on everyone, suffocating the festive pretense of Thanksgiving. For a long, excruciating moment, no one spoke. My family members stared, first at me, then at Mom, their faces a tableau of shock and confusion. Dad looked utterly bewildered, as if he'd just been dropped into a play he didn't understand. Olivia's jaw was clenched. Sarah's eyes were still wide, glistening with unshed tears. And Michael looked utterly mortified, his head bowed. Then Mom's face, which had been pale with shock, began to flush a furious crimson. Her eyes, usually sharp, now blazed with an incandescent rage. It wasn't the kind of anger born of hurt or regret. It was pure, unadulterated fury at being exposed, at having her carefully constructed web of secrets torn apart in front of her adoring audience. The idea of gratitude, of an apology, of any acknowledgement of my generosity or their deceit, simply vanished. Instead, she slammed her open palm down on the table, a sound that made everyone jump. The delicate china rattled. Her voice, when it came, was a venomous hiss, barely contained, vibrating with indignation. How dare you? Emily? How dare you embarrass me like this in front of everyone on Thanksgiving? Her words were a whiplash, turning the blame back on me. It wasn't about her lies, her deceit, or her taking advantage. It was about my audacity in exposing the truth. Her eyes, still fixed on me, were now truly terrifying, devoid of any warmth, any recognition of me as her daughter. You think you're so smart, don't you? Coming in here, throwing your money around, acting like you're better than us. Well, let me tell you something, young lady, she snarled, leaning across the table, her face contorted with rage, her finger pointing directly at me, trembling with fury. You don't deserve a seat at this table. Not after this. Not ever. It was the same exact phrase, the same cutting words she had used to open this nightmare of a day. But this time they landed differently. The first time they were a fresh wound, a new sting of exclusion. This time they were a confirmation, a validation of everything I had just revealed. Her fury wasn't an attack on me. It was an admission of her own guilt masked by defensiveness. She couldn't admit fault, so she attacked. But this time, I wasn't hurt. I wasn't crushed. Something inside me had hardened, forged in the crucible of their long neglect and this recent profound betrayal. The heat of her anger didn't burn me. It only solidified my resolve. I felt a strange, quiet calm descend over me, a clarity I hadn't known I possessed. The silence returned to the room, tense and thick. As everyone braced for my reaction, they probably expected tears, an argument, an apology. But I had no more tears for them. And certainly no apologies. I looked at her calmly, steadily. Then with a slow, deliberate movement, I finally stood up from the tiny, humiliating stool. My posture was straight. My head held high. For the first time all day, I was at eye level with the rest of them. My hand, steady and unhesitating, went to my pocket and retrieved my phone. The screen glowed, a small bright beacon in the charged atmosphere. "Oh, I agree. Mom," I said, my voice clear and utterly devoid of emotion. A stark contrast to her raw fury. It surprised even myself how calm I sounded. "I don't deserve a seat at this table." "You're absolutely right." I didn't break eye contact with her. My thumb moved across the screen. A series of precise taps. I navigated to my banking app, pulled up the list of recurring payments, and then with a final decisive tap, I hit a button. I held the phone up, putting it on speaker. The clear, robotic voice of the bank's automated system filling the suddenly silent dining room. "Payments canceled. Your instruction has been received. Please note that all future scheduled payments to landlords, name, power company, internet provider, grocery delivery service, and insurance company have been terminated. Effective today." The automated voice, calm and efficient, delivered the final undeniable truth of my action. It was clinical, devoid of human drama, yet it carried more power than any shout or argument could. The words hung in the air, echoing the hollow emptiness of our family's dynamic. I watched their faces. Mom's fury instantly dissolved into a gaping shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her lower lip trembling. Michael looked like he had been punched in the gut, his face ashen. The illusion, the comfortable reliance, the quiet expectation that I would always be there. A silent, invisible source of support. It had just been shattered into a million pieces. The automated voice on my phone completed its detached confirmation of canceled payments. And then silence, thick and suffocating, descended once more. This time, it wasn't just shock. It was dread. The air crackled with the unspoken implications of my actions. Mom's face was still frozen in disbelief, her mouth slightly open, her furious energy completely drained, replaced by a stunned, empty horror. Then Olivia sprang into action. "Emily, what are you doing? Stop. You can't just do that." Her voice was shrill, panicked. She lunged forward slightly, reaching across the table as if to grab my phone to physically undo what I had just done. Her eyes were wide, not with concern for me, but with the dawning realization of what this meant for them. The comfortable safety net, the one she probably hadn't even known existed, was now gone. Sarah, tears streaming down her face, echoed Olivia's plea. though her tone was more desperate, less accusatory. Please. Emily. Think about what you're doing. Mom. Mom needs those payments. You can't just cut her off. She too tried to reach for my phone, her hand trembling. Her usual calm compassion had dissolved into raw fear. Not for my well-being, but for the immediate consequences for our mother. Michael, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally found his voice, though it was weak, barely a whisper. Emily. My insurance. What about my insurance? His focus, predictably, was entirely on himself, on the immediate personal inconvenience. The Prinkling's comfortable life was suddenly threatened, and he couldn't fathom it. The insurance I had been quietly paying for him after he'd totaled his car and couldn't manage the increased premiums was now gone. The safety of his perfectly unburdened life, supported by me, I had just evaporated. I remained perfectly still, my arm outstretched, keeping them at bay. My gaze, steady and unwavering, swept over each of their faces. There was no anger in me now, only a profound, chilling clarity. Their reactions were exactly what I had expected, exactly what solidified my decision. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one of them apologized for the years of neglect, the casual cruelty, the deliberate humiliation of the stool. Their concern was entirely self-serving, focused only on the immediate impact on their own comfort and convenience. My voice. When I spoke, it was calm, steady, and utterly resolute. It was the voice of a woman who had finally found her truth and was no longer afraid to speak it. Quiet was cruel. I began, each word a slow, deliberate hammer blow. The silence when I called. The conversations always redirected. The years of simply forgetting I existed. That was cruel. My eyes met Sarah's, acknowledging her well-intentioned but ultimately shallow pity. She recoiled slightly as if struck. I turned my gaze to Olivia. The stool was cruel, deliberately placing me lower than everyone else, making me literally beneath you all. An afterthought at a table that was supposed to be about family togetherness. That was cruel. Olivia's face was rigid, her jaw tight, but she didn't respond. There was nothing she could say. Then I looked at Mom, whose face was still a picture of shock and dawning panic. Pretending my work didn't matter, dismissing my achievements as selfish or meaningless, while secretly relying on the very money I earned from that meaningless work to support your own life. And Michael's. That was cruel. My voice didn't rise, but the weight of each word was undeniable, pressing down on her with the full force of years of suppressed pain. This, I finished, my voice now laced with an undeniable quiet power. This isn't cruelty. This isn't a fit of pique. This isn't revenge. I paused, letting the full impact of my next words sink in. This is clarity. I looked around at their stunned faces, at the shattered illusions that lay exposed on the table. mingling with the remnants of the untouched Thanksgiving feast. They had relied on my invisibility, on my quiet compliance, on my endless capacity to give without receiving. They had comfortable lives built in part on my unacknowledged contributions. And now that comfort was gone. The payments ended. Not with a bang, but with a series of quiet digital clicks. The automatic system would ensure it. There was no going back. I wasn't just cutting off funds. I was cutting off the expectation. The assumption, the entitlement that had defined our relationship. I took a deep breath. And for the first time in years, the air felt lighter, cleaner, filled not with the stale odor of obligation, but with the fresh scent of freedom. I had finally chosen myself. And in doing so, I had taken my power back. The air in the dining room remained thick with the aftermath of my actions. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared. Their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and a dawning terrible understanding. I looked at each of them one last time. A quiet, resolute calm settling deep within me. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to explain. My message had been delivered. Not just in words, but in an undeniable action. I turned, picked up my purse, and without another glance, walked out of the dining room, through the front door, and into the cool evening air. The BMW was waiting in the driveway, a symbol of the life I had built for myself, far away from their expectations and their casual cruelties. I drove away, leaving behind the shattered illusions and the stunned silence, a feeling of profound sense of release. Weeks later, the call came. My phone buzzed, and again, Mom appeared on the screen. My heart didn't lurch this time. It simply beat, steady, and strong. I answered, "Emily." Her voice was thin, ready, utterly devoid of its usual sharp edge or condescending tone. It was the voice of a woman stripped bare, vulnerable. Perhaps for the first time in my memory. I just wanted to say. She paused and I heard a shaky breath. I was wrong about everything. I waited, saying nothing, letting the uncomfortable silence hang between us, forcing her to fill it. I was proud of the wrong things, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I was so focused on what Olivia and Sarah were doing on Michael's path. I didn't see you. I didn't see what you were building. And I made you earn love that should have been yours unconditionally. I made you feel like you had to prove your worth to sit at a table that was always supposed to be yours. There was a deep sigh. A genuine sound of regret that I had waited my entire life to hear. The house. The bills. I was scared. Emily. And I took advantage. I'm so sorry. It wasn't a complete overhaul of her personality. Not a sudden transformation into a perfect mother. But it was honest. It was vulnerable. It was an admission of truth. A raw unveiling of fear and pride. And a clear, explicit apology for the very things that had shaped my deepest wounds. It was the first true crack in the facade I had ever witnessed. It wasn't about her feeling bad for me. It was about her finally admitting her own failings. That made all the difference. Months later, the invitation arrived again. This time, it wasn't a tentative call for Thanksgiving. It was a proper heartfelt letter signed by Mom, Dad, Olivia, Sarah, and even Michael. It was for a casual family dinner, not a grand holiday. But the message was clear. We'd like you to come home properly. I drove back. Not in the rental, but in my own car. As I walked into the dining room, my heart was calm. And there it was. Not the old chipped stool. Not a space hastily made for me. But a real chair. A comfortable dining chair pulled out and set specifically for me. At the table, a place setting. Neat and intentional. Waiting. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but it spoke volumes. It said, "You belong here. You are seen. You have a place." I sat down, feeling the solid wood beneath me. The comfortable height. I was at eye level with everyone. It wasn't about forgiveness in the sense of forgetting. It was about forging a new path. A new understanding built on truth and acknowledgement. The road ahead would be long. Rebuilding trust and redefining relationships. But this was the beginning. A quiet moment of power, of emotional closure on a painful chapter, and the opening of a new one where my worth was finally acknowledged. Not earned. If you've ever been told you don't deserve a seat,